Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast, broadcasting from the base at La Madre Mountain, just south of Area 51. My name is Ryan, the original outlaw of the airwaves, bringing you an epic episode today. On today's episode, we have someone I have wanted to talk to for quite some time, April Slaughter, owner and CEO at the Slaughterhouse Collective, LLC, author of Ghosthunting, Texas, Reaching Beyond the Veil, and Disconnected from Death, the Evolution of Funerary Customs and the Unmasking of Death in America. She is also the artist behind Slaughter Skulls and Slaughter Designs, all available on aprilslaughter.com. April is a longtime Utah investigator of the paranormal with a lot of experience under her belt. But Utah is not the only place she's investigated. She's investigated all over the place. Whether it be chasing ghosts, skinwalkers, or UFOs, April has done it. So buckle up and prepare for some great conversation today. I have had the pleasure of investigating with April in the past and can say she is the real deal. Lots to offer and a very knowledgeable source of information. I couldn't be more excited about the guest today, and I know the show is going to rock. April, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I have been looking forward to talking to you for some time. You've been up to a whole lot of stuff. You've got, the Slaughter Skulls, Slaughter Designs. Your website's amazing. Before we get into things, can you tell our guests where they can get your books and where they can keep up with everything you've got going on?
Well, you can find me on any of the social media platforms, just April Slaughter, and of course I have aprilslaughter.com. You can reach out to me by email as well, and that's just aprilslaughter@icloud.com. I love hearing from people. I love talking to them about my various projects. You can find my books either on my website or through amazon.com.
Awesome. Love it all. And I think currently you are based in Texas. Is that correct, April?
No, I've been back in Utah for it's been about 10 years now. I was in Texas for a little while, but I did move back to the state about 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh, see? It's been too long that we've talked.
Long time, yeah.
That is so cool. Well, you have definitely a ton of experience in Utah with things all over the place. I know you've gone to a lot of haunted locations and done research, as well as the Uinta Basin. Where do we kick off here? Where should we start?
Well, I think the most recent theme that people seem to be most interested in is Skinwalker Ranch, or the Uinta Basin here in northeastern Utah. It was something that I've researched for upwards of about 15 years now, but didn't really get a lot of attention back when I first started doing it. Not many people really knew that much about it. They weren't really familiar with it. And so, I'd written some articles and whatnot for the magazine I was currently working for at the time, and just kind of let it go. I just kind of put it in the back of my mind and went on to other things. But with the show on the History Channel, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, people started to get more interested in the subject again and started reaching out to me and have asked that I share my story. So that's something that's happened recently that I haven't been quite used to. So it's really nice to actually have a platform to share that with people now.
So true. It is something that has really kind of been in the recesses in the past, and now it just seems like it's on the forefront. Well, let's kick off there. I think that's a great place to kick off. I know you've been to the area and had some experiences. Let's delve into them.
Sure. Well, my first trip out to the area, to Skinwalker specifically, was in October of 2006, I believe. And so it's been a minute. And that first visit to the area I was actually not on the ranch. I believe I was on the property that you now own when I first visited that borders the ranch.
Yep.
And so I was taken out there by my friend, who we lovingly call Alien Dave Rosenfeld. I believe he's a friend of yours as well.
Yep.
And he was the one that connected us, I think, initially. And, I got to talking to him about Skinwalker. I read the book by Kelleher Knapp and Hunt for the Skinwalker. And, Dave said he knew where this place was and he'd be willing to take me out there. And so I jumped at the chance to go. And from the moment I decided to go till I came back home from that experience, it was just a surreal sort of thing. There was a group of 6 of us that Dave escorted out to the southern border of Skinwalker Ranch, and we decided to camp out there. But on the way from Salt Lake City to the basin, we got pulled over twice by police or sheriff's deputies, and we weren't speeding. We didn't have taillights out. There was no reason to pull us over. It was just kind of odd. It was kind of seemed to me like, I wonder if they know we're coming out there. Because at the time, it was still a huge kind of big secreted thing. There was no TV show. There was, the locals really didn't even want people to know where this place was. And so it kind of put me on edge that, okay, well, I'm already being asked why I'm headed out to the basin by police officers. And I wasn't a stranger to the basin. I spent most of my summers growing up out there with cousins and family, and had weird experiences. So to me, it was normal to be going out there, but it seemed like something just kind of knew we were coming. And so we get to the property, we set up for the evening. It was in October, and, waited for night to fall and just started kind of surveilling over the homesteads from the southern end of the property. And just weird stuff started happening to all of us. Now, I have to put an asterisk on this, that out of the 6 of us that were there, all of us had vastly different experiences. And I don't discount anybody else's recalling of the incidents, but mine were quite a bit different than some of the things that have been reported in the past. So at the time, I was dating an individual who was in what he called chaos magic, or what I would call black magic, things to kind of disrupt or upset. And that's not something that I condone at all. It's not something I practice.
Sure.
I do a lot of research into it, but it's just not something that I delve into. And so he and a buddy of his that was there with us decided they wanted to carve or scratch what we call sigils, symbols that are supposed to invoke some sort of energetic response out of the environment into the dirt on the ranch. And I wanted no part of that whatsoever. So they went and kind of climbed down onto the ranch property and did that. Oblivious to me, I had no part in it. And then we just kind of sat there thinking nothing would really happen until things really did start to happen. We had all different kinds of surveillance. We had night vision, we had binoculars, we had video cameras, all that kind of stuff. And we were just watching over Homestead 1 and strange lights. I believe there were blue and orange lights, from what I can remember, just started acting strangely in the sky above Homestead 1. They weren't flying toward us. They weren't doing it. They were just lights. It looked like probably big firefly lights kind of over the homestead. And, okay, that's interesting. To me, that was, wow, I'm seeing something. I don't know what it is. But me being the skeptical researcher that I am, kept thinking, okay, well, if someone did know we were coming out here, they could have flashlights or they could have something rigged up out there. I'm constantly trying to figure out how people are conning in paranormal situations, because people do that, unfortunately. They do want to create something, and they want to kind of trick people. So watching this, I couldn't figure out how these lights were happening, but they weren't scary to me. They weren't really off-putting. I just thought, this is interesting. And then as the night wore on, we were just sitting there in the dark looking up at the sky. In the basin, especially on a clear night, it's the most beautiful sky of stars you could see. And there was not a cloud in the sky that night. We were all just kind of looking up toward the sky, and right above us was, I would say, about 300 feet in a rectangular type shape, from what I can remember. There was no stars all around that shape, but directly above us there was just blackness. There was nothing. There was no spacecraft. There was nothing. It was just a void.
Wow.
And we heard like a whirring type noise above us. And we just kind of all sat there and looked at it. And then within a minute or so, it was just gone. It didn't fly off. It didn't disappear. It just, the stars reappeared and the noise was gone. And during that whole thing, we experienced shifts of emotion, erratic, but pretty universal. So one minute the group would be yelling at each other for no reason. And then the next minute we'd be laughing about something ridiculous. And then the next we'd totally ignore each other. And it just seemed to have control over our emotions without us really having any say in that. And so this is the point where I started to get really sort of nervous that there was something sentient kind of aware of us and messing with us, I guess. And I looked back because I heard something behind one of the vehicles. It was behind my truck. And there was this tall figure. It looked like a human. It was shaped like a human figure, but it was much taller than any human I've met. Well over 7 feet tall, at least. Mm-hmm. And I just saw it as a shadow person kind of peeking out from behind this truck and just kind of looking at us in our direction. Didn't see any features, no eyes, nothing like that. But my boyfriend at the time, we just kind of looked at each other, and I said, are you seeing this? Are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing? And he said he was, except he's like, what are all those things flying off of it? And I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. I didn't understand what he meant by that because I didn't see that. But he had seen this figure as this, shadow person, but it had little things flying off of it and back into it, which he kind of explained to me at the time looked like little squids. Yeah. Kind of flying off of it and then coming back and flying off of it and coming back. And he was terrified. And I'm just looking at him like, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Like, what is it? I just see this thing behind the truck. And then all of a sudden he pulls his hand to his face like he'd been hit, like something had slapped him in the face. And he grabbed his nose and his mouth. And I was like, what just happened to you? And he said, something flew into my head.
Whoa.
What? I didn't see anything. What are you talking about? I thought he was being melodramatic, mm-hmm. as he sometimes could be. And I just didn't have that experience. So I was like, okay, whatever. Maybe a bug flew up your nose or something. I don't know what it is you think you experienced, but I totally dismissed it and just kind of, watched this figure kind of fade out. It didn't walk away, it didn't fly away. It just wasn't there anymore. Kind of like the thing in the sky. So as we start focusing on other stuff, he started complaining about a headache and that he was not feeling very well. And we were looking out over Homestead 2. And the best way I can describe what I saw was, if you've ever seen the movie Predator, that kind of liquidy mirage type of movement.
Sure. Yep.
We saw that in front of Homestead 2. It was like somebody put Vaseline over my eyes, and it just kind of, I couldn't see detail, but I knew it wasn't in my eyes. I was looking at it, and that stayed, I don't know. I think somebody caught footage of that, but nobody seems to be able to know where that footage is now. And then we focused on Homestead 3, which I had seen earlier when we were setting up camp through our different optic devices, and then it was just gone. It was like somebody had photoshopped it right out of the landscape. Like there was nothing of it there. Mm-hmm. Which was really odd to me. And so by the time we'd seen all of these things happening and my boyfriend had this experience with his face and whatnot, we were all so tired. It was probably 3 or 4 in the morning before we called it a night. And we crawled into our tents, our respective tents. There was 2 of us in each tent. And me and my boyfriend went to sleep. And I woke up the next morning with not only my boyfriend, but a couple other people in the group forcefully waking me up, shaking me and saying my name. And I just was like, what is the deal? So I wake up, I come to, but I was in a fetal position at the bottom of my sleeping bag, which I would never sleep that way. Right. I don't like anything covering my face when I'm asleep. So being in that position was weird, and being woken up, I'm a light sleeper, so that anyone would have to shake me was kind of disconcerting. And as I came to, my boyfriend said, where did you go last night? I'm like, okay, I didn't go anywhere. What are you talking about? I've been here all night.
Whoa. And
he said, no, you weren't. I woke up thinking that maybe you needed to use the restroom or something, and you were gone for an hour and a half. I'm like, okay, stop. Don't mess with me. This isn't funny. I haven't gone anywhere. I feel fine. And he said, no, you were gone. And I really didn't even believe anything that they were saying. I thought they were just pulling a prank on me until I looked over at my boots on the inside of the tent. And they were covered in mud, which where we were camping, there was no water source. There was no, I mean, it was dry. There was nothing, nothing. There was no place for me to step in mud. And I wouldn't know until much later, many years down the road, that there was water nearby. It was just actually on the ranch. There was a creek.
Right.
I forget what it's called. Is it Dry Gulch Creek? I can't remember what it's called.
Yep.
But, you know, I thought, okay, maybe somebody put mud on my boots. But nobody had mentioned that to me as sort of evidence that I was gone. So kind of just went, all right, whatever. Why didn't you come looking for me if you thought I was gone for 90 minutes? And the answer was pretty simple. You know, I've been able to handle myself in a lot scarier situations. They thought maybe I just had to use the restroom, and they were all so tired they just went back to sleep. And so that seemed reasonable to me. And the next day, that same day when I had woken up and was told I'd been gone, we decided to hike Skinwalker Ridge as a group, which I did, but I did it without any sort of, it's like I had boundless energy. It was the strangest thing. I hadn't hiked a lot back then. I do now, but I didn't get out of breath. The sun didn't bother me, didn't get sunburned, which I'm totally susceptible to. Didn't need water, didn't need resting. None of my muscles ached. It was just like, it was like I was invincible. I could have done anything that day. And we saw some strange movement. Could have been res dogs, could have been something. I don't know what it was, but something running along the ridge in the middle of the day. And when we called it, you know, to head back to Salt Lake, I thought that would be the end of my Skinwalker Ranch experience. But, you know, it wasn't. Everybody had their own versions of events of that night, and they didn't really match up. It caused some confliction between the group. And you know, I went back off to do my other investigations and my work, and I'm a mom to twin daughters, one with special needs. So my focus was kind of pulled away and just went about life until I believe I was in Texas at the time. I was visiting Utah when I visited the ranch, and then I was living in Texas. And when I was back in Texas, I was in Walmart with my twin daughters. They were young and just shopping. And two guys came up to me in an aisle, one of the food aisles, and they looked like they might have been like Mormon missionary types, but they didn't have the name tags. And they just said, "Hey, are you April Slaughter?" And, you know, every once in a while, not often, I'm not saying I'm famous or anything, but in some places people know who I am. And so I thought, oh, maybe they got a book or something. And so I said, yeah, I'm April Slaughter. And they said, never go back to the ranch again. And this was a couple months later. And I was like, what do you mean? You mean skin? Like, in my head, I was like, what are you talking about? And they were very stern, and they stood very close to me and said, do not ever go back to the ranch again. And then they walked off. And my mom instincts were just to put myself between them and my kids. So I didn't chase after these people. I just was floored. I'm like, I'm in Texas. This is months later. Why am I being approached by strangers telling me never to go back? I just didn't try to find out what that was about. I was like, okay, fine, message received. I don't want any danger coming to me or my kids, so I'll just never go back.
Right.
And then I did. But it was years and years and years later. It was actually September of last year that I actually got to go back to the ranch. And I can't really expound there until later down the road. But it's kind of come full circle. It's a strange thing to have had that experience, and nobody really pay much attention to it until all of a sudden now people are like dying to hear the story. So that's what happened to me.
Wow. And you know, the area is a beautiful mystery like that. Like exactly like you said, it comes full circle in a way. And it is fascinating to me, especially that you had so much energy the next day. You know, that is so cool. And so similar to like other cases I've heard. And you're right about the perspective being so key from the observation perspective. Like each individual, when something goes down, let's just say it that way, it's amazing how different the memories can be. And, you know, I can relate with that. And it's interesting that everybody had similar experiences, but not similar recollections of the experiences.
Right.
Did you happen to go? I know some may have gone through hypnosis. Did you happen to do the hypnosis at all, April?
I didn't, and it's not because I'm really afraid of it unlocking anything. I am. It's weird when it comes to the ranch. I just have this feeling that at some point it's going to reveal whatever happened to me will reveal itself in some way. Hopefully not a traumatic one. I just don't want to have to go through something that isn't my brain isn't ready to really kind of grapple with. And that's, a lot of people have offered to do that. I've undergone different types of experiments as far as like EMDR and different psychotherapy things to just try and figure some things out. But as far as hypnosis goes, I just never did that. Now, my boyfriend at the time, like I said, who had experienced this strange thing that he said flew into space, I think he had undergone some stuff, but we didn't really keep in touch. We broke up fairly quickly after that experience, and It wouldn't be until a couple years after that we reconnected and sat down at a meal where he told me that he was suffering from brain cancer, and he attributed it entirely to what happened at the ranch and his quote-unquote chaos magic that he had done, and that he had regretted doing that, which was really frightening to have somebody say that. They thought that the ranch kind of clapped back at them, and he actually did succumb to his cancer a few years ago. So, but he believed, at least he told me, he believed that it was because of what had happened out at the ranch, and he wanted to share more details about his experience with me. I just wasn't really interested in hearing it. I had put the ranch kind of in the back of my mind, and it's in a lot of ways it's still there.
It's always there, isn't
hopefully it? Hopefully, if at some point, there's some purpose in having me know what happened to me, or if I really did go missing, then I'll find that out on my own. I just don't want to poke the bear, I guess.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say.
And he's one of my heroes. He is one of my heroes in a lot of senses. But yes, a very tragic case. And there is injury that can take place. And I've heard from, without naming names, very intelligent people that, each time you have an experience like that, you give a little piece of yourself. And I think it's really fascinating that you guys saw this rectangular, I don't want to call it a craft or a void.
It's like blackout. Yeah, it was just, there was nothing. It was a void.
Right. This is fascinating. And the area can be much like a void. And, as you said, getting pulled over on the way up there, that's very precognitive. And a lot of people smarter than myself have called it a precognitive intelligence that roams the landscape. And it's almost, I heard someone else call it a precellular replicon, which is like, what? But yeah, there's something, it appears as if something can manifest itself, and not only that, but adjust space and time in a way where it knows what you're going to do before you do it. Did you have any experiences with anything like that?
No, other than being pulled over and me kind of recognizing at the time that was strange, because like I said, we weren't breaking any laws. And two, I forgot to mention, all of us, we didn't want to be seen when we were out there at night. So we're dressed in black. There's cases of equipment in my car. Like there's all these indications that we're up to something, right? And so when the police officers asked us, where we were going or what we were doing, they didn't want to look into anything. They didn't ask us about it was just really strange. They just kind of were like, okay, like just letting us know that we were being watched. And even the entire time we were out on the perimeter of the ranch, we had eyes on us. We all could feel it. We had locals, I believe, trying to warn us to get out of the area by driving their trucks, and their dogs were barking at us. And it was just a really sort of heavy energy at the time. And I didn't feel entirely comfortable. I wasn't scared per se, but it just seemed to know, like with the emotions, the fluctuation of emotions, it just seemed to have fun. I don't know what it is.
It's super heavy.
I like to just call it the ranch because that's just how I see it. But it just seemed to know how to manipulate us and how to affect us in different ways at the same time. And I had never experienced that before or afterward in any other sort of investigation of anything supernatural. So to me, the ranch is very specific that way, that it's not only is every kind of phenomenon reported out there, But it seems to be able to manifest itself as something that would scare someone in different ways. Like I've been asked, what do I think is happening out on the ranch? What do I think is the secret out there? And my idea isn't like everyone else's, at least as far as I know. They want to tackle it from scientific views or whatnot. What I believe it is there's something out there that likes to manifest your greatest fear. So if you're scared of seeing little green men, that's what you'll see. If you're scared of seeing dire wolves, that's what you'll see. If you're scared of, going missing in the middle of the night, that might happen. And so I think it just finds a way to manipulate your fears or your anxieties, and then people assign things like, oh, it's a huge UFO place. And that may be. There may be actual UFOs out there. I have never seen one. That's not my experience. But what I've seen are things that did kind of rattle me. And then, the people that were with me saw different things. They even reported seeing a giant bird.
Yes.
I had never seen that. But they said it was like pterodactyl huge, this bird that they saw flying through the sky. And no one had ever told me that at the time, that they'd seen that. So I saw no indication of that. But I can't, like I said, I can't discount what they were seeing. I think whatever knew we were coming kind of thought, well, these are the games I'm going to play, and this is how it's going to play out. And then afterward, I was warned never to do it again. So, it was just, it's a unique experience. It's a unique place. I know there are other places claiming to be like that in different parts of the country, but I would have to visit them to even half believe that could be possible, because this place is just off the charts crazy.
It's dynamite, and I agree. I have a gentleman that's coming on the podcast here on shortly. His name is James Trey Hudson, and he did something called the Meadows Project. And like you said, there's a lot of places that claim to be similar to Skinwalker Ranch. And
Right.
But I'm with you. I agree to some extent that it exponentially multiplies on phobias or belief systems. Yeah, for sure. It is definitely a precognitive intelligence, as many have called it in the past. And, it's interesting. I loved what you said about, did somebody do this because they knew we were coming, because it's like a display? And I've had people totally, like you said, go to the area. Let's just say they went to the area very skeptical. And during the experience that they had, they finally looked at me and said, this would have cost millions of dollars to do this kind of display. And it's like, well, I'm not doing it. It's like, it's not me, and, they think, but it's hard. You have to go into it as a skeptic. And I'm glad that you often do that and try to debunk things, because it's one of those areas that is so dynamic and dynamite that there is definitely an exchange that takes place between the display and observer. Let's go into some other stuff. So you were in Texas for quite a while, and you've done a lot of very deep investigation, as much as I would love to stay on the Skinwalker aspect forever.
Sure.
Tell us about some of the interesting areas in Texas and what you've encountered there as well.
Well, two things about Texas that first come to mind. In the 25 plus years that I've been doing paranormal or spirit investigation, I had never, up until that point, had a demonic case, which, reality TV would have you believe they happen more often than not, but they don't.
Right. I
only had the one case, and it was in a very rural part of Texas, in a mobile home that had been refurbished. And a family had, they had a little girl that she was 4 or 5 at the time, and she started saying that it started slowly, but she started seeing another little girl in the house, and she was making friends with her and talking, and her parents thought she just had an imaginary friend, and then it just sort of kind of escalated. This over a year's time, this little girl began getting physically accosted at night, and her parents were afraid that they were going to be accused of abusing her, and so they put up cameras. They did all kinds of things to try and see what was happening with her, and there was a point where several nights in a row, all of the daughter's bedroom furniture would end up against the door by morning, and there's no way a 4-year-old, 5-year-old little girl could do that. So they were pretty desperate. Nobody seemed to believe what was happening, and so in investigating that case, sadly, I mean, it was pretty obvious that whatever there was pretty. I hate to use the word demonic, but it was. I mean, it was very aggressive. It was very dark. It was very. It wanted to put on a show and frighten people, and my team it did that quite a bit. And we got all kinds of audio of different voices talking at the same time, saying different things, and we saw people walking up and down the hallways while we were in there, and it was just a very oppressive type feeling. And when we told the family, we really do think you have a legitimate problem, we reached out to every faith-based organization, every single one, whether it be Catholicism, Buddhism, Mormonism, all of these different faith-based systems, and nobody was willing to help that family. Not a single one of them.
Right.
Were willing to go in there and do whatever, whether it's called a blessing, exorcism, clearing, whatever. Nobody was willing to help them. And so in doing the research behind their home, because it had only happened when they moved into this refurbished mobile home, the serial number of that mobile home was traced back to another place in Texas where it had been used as a prostitution den, a child sex trafficking ring. All kinds of drugs happened. A suspected murder had happened in that house. And according to the law at the time, they didn't have to disclose that by refurbishing. They could just refurbish it and sell it, and they didn't have to tell anybody what had occurred in the home. And so we presented that information to the family, and along with the fact that nobody was willing to help try to rid their home of whatever was happening. And so they moved. And I never found out if the family that moved into it had an issue, but the little girl was fine. Nothing followed her. And so far she's had a great, calm life growing up after they've left that house. But that was the only demonic case that I've ever encountered. I've had negative cases, but those are two distinctly different things. Just because something's negative doesn't make it evil. So I think that's a huge distinction that people need to learn, especially in the spirit communication and investigation realm. It's just because something is negative doesn't necessarily mean it's of the devil.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people that are super negative. It doesn't mean they're evil.
It doesn't mean they're bad people, right?
But other than that, my most profound case in Texas, which I'm super grateful that I had, it took me a long time to develop a relationship with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, but I really wanted to do that because I'd heard that the old death row and the current execution chamber was haunted. So, of course, I wanted to investigate that, and it took me a number of years to gain their trust, but they did actually allow me into their working prisons called the Walls or Huntsville Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas, the oldest prison in the state, and it's still where they execute people today. It's the most active death chamber in the country. And so they walked me in, and they locked me in for a night.
Nice.
And it's a working prison, so you can imagine they walk me through the yard of all these inmates working out, and things are being yelled at me and whatever. And
I'm sure.
And the guards on the ground don't have weapons. Only the guards up on the turrets have weapons in case they get overtaken. So, I mean, I didn't really feel protected, but I got locked in and got to spend some time in the old death row, hearing screaming. I experienced apparitions. It smells, just crazy activity happened in there. And then they took me to the current death house, where I think just 2 or 3 days before they had executed someone.
Whoa.
And left me in there for a night. So
Epic.
It was terrifying. Sadly, there hasn't been much of a follow-up with that because a certain, and without naming names, a certain television show had read an article I'd written about my experience there and had used my name to get access to other buildings. And now the Texas Department of Criminal Justice will no longer allow any sort of paranormal investigation of their buildings because of that.
Oh, man.
So sadly, working all that time to get their trust, I still have their trust. They trust me just fine. But there are other good people in the field that should be able to go in and investigate buildings, and especially with such historical value. And the people that have a shadier type of agenda in this field, they kind of ruin it for people. But
totally.
That one for me was something that nobody else had done. I was the only paranormal investigator that had ever done that. And places that get investigated all the time, like the Stanley Hotel or the Queen Mary or these famously haunted places. Well, this one was a famously haunted place that nobody else had investigated. So I think in Texas, that was probably my biggest accomplishment and one of the most profound experiences that I'd had.
That's amazing. That is amazing. It is.
Yeah.
Texas has a ton of stuff. And coming back to Utah, Utah has, from a historical perspective, a ton of things.
Yep.
Have you come across any amazing, from a historical perspective, areas in Utah that you have investigated? And could you share some of those stories?
Sure. One place that isn't really well known was a place called the Home of Truth, and it was just outside of Monticello, Utah. And I was just doing research about historical ghost towns in Utah, because besides being into the paranormal, I'm a history buff. And so I was doing some research and found out that the Home of Truth was a cult. Forgive me for not knowing the exact dates, but it was, early 19th or early 20th century. This woman, Marie Ogden, established a faith-based group out there called the Home of Truth, and she claimed that she could not only speak with people on the other side of the veil, but that she could resurrect the dead.
Whoa.
And so a group of people moved out there. They made a little homestead out there. They, established a life. And then one of their followers passed away, and she kept the body from from the family of this woman and tried to resurrect her for quite a long time. And then the authorities got involved, and she refused to tell them where the body was. And so I had to go out there. I had to see this place. And if there's nothing out there now. It's just some old, ramshackle buildings and whatnot. It's privately owned now, so you can't just go out on the property now. But when I went, just passing through, if you didn't know what had happened there, you would still feel that there was something that had been either conjured or called out there that still remained out there. So there's a very heavy sort of energy out there. And when I investigated it, like a lot of other places, equipment failed. I couldn't record anything, or by the time I was able to review it, it was all wiped. Batteries died.
Yeah.
And a lot of these places I investigate by myself, so there wasn't anybody else to corroborate, that sort of feeling or whatnot when I was out there. But it's one of those places I'd love to get back to. And maybe it is, maybe there are spirits there that can tell us what happened. But I think this woman was very much into the darker side of the occult. And so, when you get into that kind of thing, you kind of open things up. And I know that there are people that have done that even at the ranch that have opened things up. So
right.
I would caution anyone just not to try to provoke anything going into any sort of spiritual or paranormal property. But that's one of the ones that most people don't know that much about. There's famous ghosts, like the Capitol Theater in Salt Lake City. They have, like most theaters, but it's legitimately haunted. That's a fun place to have gone. I think Saltaire is also a fascinating story. I don't know if you know much about the history of Saltaire.
Yes.
Out on the Great Salt Lake.
That place is off the chain.
It used to be the biggest resort, in the West for a long period of time. And it was built out of wood. I mean, it burned, I think, a total of 3 times to the ground. And now it's kind of a shadow of what it used to be. But there's a lot of history there, too. There's a faceless man out there that people have told me they see when they're out walking around the grounds or, around the edge of the Great Salt Lake, where it's like a faceless man in a suit approaches them, and they just are kind of paralyzed out there. Now, I don't know who he is. I have not seen him personally, but a lot of people who aren't even into paranormal investigation have told me this story. And so that's something I really want to delve into in the future. And I'm actually doing that. There's a new book coming out called Carnival of Souls.
Nice.
Utah's history with the unexplained. That I'll have that story in as well. But I think Utah gets downplayed a lot, and I don't know if it's just because of the religious kind of cloud that hangs over the state. But there are places that even the LDS Church owns now that I would love to investigate, but I'm just not allowed to. They don't really want that sort of attention. But there are places that I know have some historical value and supernatural value as well that the church owns, and I wish I could get into them, but I just can't.
I hear you. There are a lot of those in Utah. Utah does seem to be kind of perfectly on that razor's edge of high strangeness in a lot of fronts. There's so many areas. And kind of getting back to some of your Utah experiences, I'm really fascinated by your quote unquote, I don't want to call them Men in Black, but it really was sort of a Men in Black experience in Walmart.
It was. It was. I mean, looking back on it, it kind of makes me laugh because I think, did that actually happen that way to me? Like, because at the time, I didn't tell many people about it because I thought they're just going to laugh at me and say that I, had this Men in Black. Well, they weren't wearing sunglasses and like suit jackets, but they were well-dressed people, men in their, I would guess, early 30s. And you don't just get approached by people unless they have like a religious message or something in that kind of context. But even at Walmart, I've never been approached by anyone really to just give me a warning. So it is kind of a Men in Black type situation. I just don't know who they could have worked for Bigelow. I don't know, the previous owner of the ranch. They could have just been people who wanted to get a rise out of me. I'm like, oh, she lives in Texas, so we can just have friends go and do this. Like, I really don't know. But to me, it felt very, very aggressive and very real. It didn't seem like a joke to me. And so, yeah, I mean, that was one of the reasons why it took me so many years to go back to the ranch. And when I actually did, the ranch welcomed me. So it wasn't, I didn't feel, I had some anticipation that this was going to be awful, and it just wasn't. So to this day, I don't know who those people were or what their agenda really was, why they were sent, why I shouldn't go back. I never got any explanation for any of that.
Yeah. And to your point, as far as who they may have been, we'll never know. But I think it's a very interesting experience. And the powers that be, whoever they are, whenever they're involved with these sorts of situations, it's hard to underestimate them because, I mean, Bigelow's no joke. None of the people involved are a joke. And I remember many cases where I thought, you get kind of, you're like, is there really somebody parked outside of my house in a blacked out Suburban? And and, only years later did I find out, by befriending this individual that, in fact, yes, they were involved. And yes, they were parked outside of my house. So this stuff does happen. I mean, April, it's wild that this happened to you, especially so many states away. And neighboring properties, I've talked to neighbors in and around this hotspot of Utah that have encountered similar things, like where people will come in the middle of the night dressed all in black and they'll be looking for something on their property. And, it's sort of one case in particular that comes to mind. Well, it really doesn't matter. This happens on a frequency, and there are these levels of government which are technically above us. And, you're sitting there thinking, do I call BIA or the police? And at the time you realize that, neither of those are at the level of what you're witnessing. And one gentleman who has come forward said that he literally had to get like his own security force. This was happening so often. And he's of Native American descent and has a really good chunk of land. And, he said, middle of the night, these crazy, but you hear these stories so often, but it's rare that you hear one that is so displaced like yours, where it's like states away. And that just fascinated me when I heard about that.
Well, another thing too, that I was in Texas, like I said, because I had visited Utah and then I went back. I had a book signing not long after that incident with the people in Walmart for the Ghosthunting Texas book. And I was in Houston in the middle of the day. I think it was a Borders bookstore, that those have all closed now. But at the time, they were doing book signings, and I was in Houston and had this long line of people waiting to get the Ghosthunting Texas book signed. And, I hadn't written articles about the ranch yet. That wasn't, widely known. But I had an experience with someone coming up to my table, and people laugh when I describe this individual, but it's the only way I know how to do it. He looked like a Hispanic Danny DeVito, darker skin, same height, pretty much like the same face, hairdo, everything. He looked exactly like Danny DeVito, just a more dark complexion. And when he approached the table, mind you, there was probably 40 or 50 other people around. I asked, who would you like me to sign the book to? He didn't say anything to me. And the two people at the table with me witnessed what I witnessed. And he looked at me. He was looking right at me. But another set of eyes moved behind his eyes.
Whoa.
And they didn't look human at all. So people were freaked out. They were like, what's in there? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm not comfortable being around this individual. Please, I had to ask them to have him leave.
Sure.
Because it made me that uncomfortable. And the entire time since I was at the ranch till now, I still believe that had something to do with it as well. That was a warning sign, or that was a sort of a sign of aggression to not delve further into it. And I didn't, like I said, until many years later. But I just kept having these weird experiences where it just my average day. I'm not even doing anything, and then I'm just getting reminders that I shouldn't have been there, or maybe
Sure.
I did something wrong by going. And so I wrote about it and I let it go until people started having much more of an interest in it. But it's a tough subject when you want to tell someone, hey, I normally do ghost investigations, but maybe I saw a reptilian at my book signing. Like, they don't think you're all there when you say things like that.
No.
But when they actually happen to you, when you have these strange things happen, you wish you couldn't believe it, but it happened. And so, I don't get scared by much. There's not a lot that rattles me, but that did. And so did the people in Walmart. So, and I haven't had anything since then that I can recall or that I would recognize as being connected. But it's a different time now. There's new owners. There's a whole different group of people out there.
Yeah.
Land has exchanged, hands, and so I don't really know what the future holds as far as that goes, or if the ranch is going to show up at some point with people and vehicles outside of my house. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. It just hasn't been my experience yet. But I'm always aware that something is aware of me and my interest in it. So I'm always keeping an eye out, and I think that's just a smart thing to do with anybody who's interested in this stuff or who chases after it. You just have to be aware of your surroundings at all times, because weird things can happen to you in the middle of the day at any point in time, and be connected to the experiences you've had in the past. And I find that especially true with the ranch.
Absolutely. And these hotspots, many hotspots, I always like to think of them as diamonds or gems, because there's many facets, like you just mentioned, to the enigma, and the way, perception, the way light shines through a gemstone or a diamond, you're going to see something different depending on where you are looking at it from. And a lot of people like to think these things are perfectly explained in declassified FOIA things. And I loved when the New York Times came out, and, much props to Ralph Blumenthal and those involved, Lissy Keen, when they came out with, amazing, forthright admissions of, ATIP and OSAP and all these amazing government programs that were centered in and around some of these areas of interest. But to your point, it's fascinating. I remember a situation where I was with, believe it or not, I was with my best friend who is a pastor, and my mother of all people, and we were near Rachel, Nevada, and they wanted to go see the gate at Area 51. I was a little like, it's just a gate, it's just, come on, it's just a gate. Nothing good can come of this. And I remember driving out to the gate, and just as we approached the gate, before we got there, there was a, I believe, lady, very weathered, tall, slender, with a backpack, walking, it appeared, out of the base. Nobody around. And it just reminds me of this Danny DeVito story. I remember we passed her, and we were all looking like, where are you, first of all? Why are you leaving this compound? And you don't look like, for lack of a better word, all that human. And we tried to rise above the occasion. We went and turned around, and we had water in the vehicle. And sure enough, turned around, went back towards the individual and handed them a bottle of water through the window. And there were no words exchanged whatsoever. They accepted it's so strange when these things happen, and you can't look too deeply into them, but oh my gosh, do they ever happen? I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, they do.
Getting back to these precognitive intelligences, have you encountered any other intelligences in other hotspots or haunted locations that really made you kind of scratch your head and make you wonder, what's going on with the matrix or the fabric of our reality?
Well, yeah, I mean, there have been places. One of my very favorite haunts, the first one I actually consider investigating outside of my childhood home, was a place called the Lehigh Hospital in Lehigh, Utah. It's no longer standing. They demolished it several years ago, but I'd spent so much time in there investigating, and over time I noticed that the phenomena would know when I was coming. Like, it would just know, like, if I didn't have a plan to go one day and then I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go spend the night in the hospital, it would be like I'd get there and my recordings or whatnot would be like, we were expecting you.
Whoa.
This is going to happen tonight. I'm like, what? No, that's not going to happen. For instance, there was I think it was the Deseret News or Daily Herald, one of the two. They had sent out some reporters because of the activity reported in the hospital, and they wanted to go through with me and kind of get a feel for the hospital. And I had been told previously that by whatever is in the hospital, spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them, I would be escorting people through when something happened. Never does anything happen when I want it to. Like, never. It just doesn't work that way. You don't get to tell the paranormal when to perform, right? So I just thought, that's not true. Well, this crew came in with me, and we were in a certain part of the hospital where they had an old original mirror from one of the hospital rooms, and this face just appeared through it. It's kind of like you would think you'd see something like that in the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, this kind of holographic face coming up through glass. And it would change positions and, different angles and peer out at us and look at us. And, they tried to figure out, how is this happening? There's no strings attached, no wires, no projectors, nothing. And then after the whole incident was over, the ghost like, told you this was going to happen, that, you were going to have a show for people and I'm like, wait, how did you even know? I didn't even know I was going to bring these people through until last minute. So there does seem to be, some sort of predictive intelligence that can tell how you're even going to behave before you know it. And it does happen occasionally. I wouldn't say it happens a lot, at least not in my experience. If I spend more time in places like the ranch, it might, but, who knows? But it does happen, and it does make me think, okay, do we have to worry about predestination? Do I have free agency, or is this just all one big puppet show? Like, it blows the mind. But I've learned not to be too analytical of those things and just experience them in the moment, take from them what I can, and then if I encounter something like that again, I can compare notes. But I really try not to assign any sort of definition to it, because then it changes and I don't get to experience it again. And that's true across the board, whether it's, at a UFO hotspot or, a haunted house or whatever the case may be. I just think there's a higher intelligence. And human beings like to think we're the top of the food chain as far as intelligence goes, but I really don't believe that's the case, especially, not knowing as much as we don't know. And things, remote viewing for one, that's something that I got really interested in and practiced for a while. That blew my mind too. Like, how can I see something when I'm not there to see it?
Beautiful thing.
So
yeah.
it's a bizarre how much you can perceive and how much the mind can actually influence that kind of stuff. And so I hope I get to experience more of that. Maybe I hope I get to experience more of that. I don't know. It could be kind of frightening to. I've had warnings of things because I do have some sensitivities. Like when my daughter was little, one of my twin daughters, I didn't know when she was born that she'd have the issues that she does now, but I was told by someone or something when she was 5 months old that something big was coming for her medically, and it did 5 years later. So I don't know, I don't know where the information comes from or how it's conveyed. It just is there, and but it does. It kind of makes me wonder about life and these experiences that I'm having. And, I think a lot of people have them and they don't talk about them as much because people do think they're kind of off their rocker when they talk about them. So it's nice to have people like you or, other enthusiasts or researchers who ask those kind of questions, because most people don't want to know that kind of thing. It trips them up.
Yes. it's a magical moment when when we are able to tap into, like you said, that higher intelligence and realize these things. April, you've been one of my favorite guests ever, and I knew this would happen.
Thank you.
Your views on the unknown are so appreciated. Let's jam into your website and what you have going on and what you have coming up in the future, and where can listeners support you and keep up with your work one more time?
Yeah, the best place to keep up with what I'm up to is my website, aprilslaughter.com. But there are a lot of new things coming. Obviously, there's a lot more artwork with the slaughter skulls that's coming in the next few months. There's, like I said, I have a new book coming out called Carnival of Souls, which is going to come out probably at the end of January, early February of this next year. I may or may not be involved in some television production stuff that I can't really get into at the moment, but that it'll be announced on my website when I can do that. And yeah, I mean, there's writing projects, there's research projects. A lot of really cool things are happening. I'm also starting my own catering company outside of all this stuff too. So I have my hand in a lot of different projects right now. But you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm all over the place. You just look me up and you'll find me.
That is great. And I am so mesmerized by the skulls. I think I will be one of your, I'm like amazed by your designs and your artwork. They're simply fantastic. And your books are amazing. Thank you so much for coming on again. And I hope we can hopefully chat again in the future. And best of luck in all your endeavors. I know a lot of people are rooting for you and amazed by everything that you've done, and success in your catering business. That sounds fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate for having me on.
Whoa, man, oh man. April Slaughter, ladies and gentlemen, hitting like a shotgun blast against the veil of reality on a moonlit night, tugging at the threads of a cardigan worn by the matrix of life. It's folks like April that bring us one step closer to understanding our place in this existence and their pushing of existential boundaries within which we live. I'm a happy camper. I hope you are too, and you enjoyed the chat. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off.